There is a kind of silence that only appears when you've been waiting for too long. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply settles in. You notice it when nothing happens. Again. When the phone doesn't vibrate. When the door doesn't open. When time moves but nothing else does. This is where waiting begins. Not the short kind. Not the kind people talk about casually. But the kind that stretches. The kind that changes you. No one prepares you for this part. People tell you to be patient. They tell you to trust the process. They say everything happens for a reason. But no one tells you how quiet it gets. While you're doing all that trusting, days start to blur. Weeks lose their shape. You wake up, not because you're ready, but because you have nothing else to do. Waiting becomes routine. At first, you believe it will be quick. You tell yourself, just a little longer. Any moment now. Today might be the day. And that belief keeps you warm. For a while. But then mornings start to feel heavy. Not sad. Just slow. You're not disappointed anymore. You're just tired of expecting. Waiting doesn't hurt at first. What hurts is the hope that comes with it. Because hope demands attention. It asks you to stay alert, to stay ready. And readiness is exhausting when nothing arrives. So you sit, and you wait, and you listen to the sound of nothing happening. There is a moment when you realize this wait is not temporary. It's not a pause between scenes. It is the scene. You're living inside it now. And the world keeps moving, as if you're not standing still. This is not the dramatic part. This is not the breaking point. This is the beginning. The silence before everything. There's a strange lie we tell ourselves about time. We say time is always moving forward. That it never stops. That it carries everything with it. But when you're waiting, time doesn't disappear. It stays. It just stops cooperating. Minutes still pass. Hours still exist. But they no longer lead anywhere. They circle. You start noticing things you never noticed before. The way the light sits in the room. How shadows stretch but never leave. How sounds feel farther away than they should. You hear clocks more clearly now. Not because they're louder, but because there's nothing else competing with them. Tick. Pause. Tick. Time reminding you that it hasn't forgotten you, even if everything else has. At some point you stop asking when. You stop checking the calendar. You stop counting days. Not because you don't care, but because caring became too heavy. So you tell yourself you're just resting, just observing, just letting things happen naturally. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not resting. You're suspended. This is the part people don't see. They think waiting looks calm from the outside. Quiet. Peaceful. But inside, everything is moving too fast. Thoughts repeat themselves. Memories resurface without permission. Questions echo without answers. You replay old moments. Not because they were better, but because they moved. Time becomes personal. It feels unfair. Selective. As if it's passing others by more gently. You see people moving forward. Changing. Arriving somewhere. And you wonder. Not angrily. Not bitterly. Just quietly. Did I miss something? You try to stay busy. You distract yourself. You reorganize things that don't matter. You scroll. You clean. You start things you don't finish. Not because you're lazy, but because beginnings feel dangerous now. Beginnings create expectations, and expectations remind you that you're still waiting. There's a moment, soft but unmistakable, when time stops feeling external. It moves inside you instead. You feel it in your chest, in your breathing, in the way you hesitate before simple decisions. You're not late. You're not early. You're nowhere. And yet, life doesn't pause with you. Messages still come in for other people. Doors open elsewhere. Moments happen without asking if you're ready. This is where waiting becomes lonely. Not because you're alone, but because the world keeps forgetting to slow down with you. You start measuring time differently. Not in hours, but in emotions. How long since I last felt excited? How long since something surprised me? How long since I stopped bracing myself? These questions don't need answers. They just sit with you. The hardest part about time is not that it moves slowly. It's that it makes you doubt yourself. You wonder if you waited wrong, if you misunderstood the signs, if patience was a mistake. And still, you stay. Because leaving feels worse than staying still. Time didn't stop because it wanted to. It stopped because you did. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because you believed something was coming. And belief has weight. This is not the breaking point. This is the stretching. The quiet tension before something shifts. Even if you can't see it yet, time is watching you now, the way you once watched it. And soon, very soon, you'll realize that waiting is not about time at all. There's a dangerous feeling that arrives quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It whispers. Almost. Not there yet. But close. Close enough to feel real. This is where waiting changes shape. It no longer feels endless. It starts to feel measured. You begin to sense movement. Not in the world, but in your expectations. Small signs suddenly feel important. Coincidences feel intentional. Silence feels like preparation. You tell yourself, this wouldn't feel this close if it wasn't. Almost as powerful. Because it feeds hope. Without delivering certainty. You start leaning forward again. Listening more closely. Watching for patterns that may not exist. Your heart reopens. Carefully. But willingly. Because almost feels safer than nothing. You replay conversations in your head. Moments that could mean something. Words that might have been signals. You don't realize it yet. But you're already rewriting the past. To make the future seem closer. Almost makes memory flexible. Your body responds before your mind does. Sleep becomes lighter. Focus sharpens, then fades. You check for updates without noticing you're checking. You tell yourself you're just being attentive. But really, you're bracing. This is the illusion. Almost feels like progress. But it doesn't move you. It keeps you in place. Alert, hopeful, suspended. You don't leave. You don't settle. You hover. People on the outside might say, you look more alive now. They notice a change in your tone. A slight energy in your voice. A cautious optimism. They don't see the cost. Hope takes effort now. Almost teaches you to negotiate with yourself. Just a bit longer. Just until this makes sense. Just until I know for sure. You keep setting invisible deadlines and quietly forgiving them when they pass. The problem with almost is that it never asks permission. It sneaks in and rearranges your expectations. Suddenly, the wait feels justified again. Not because anything changed, but because it might. There's a subtle fear hiding here. Not of disappointment, but of what happens if you stop believing. Because if almost disappears, you're left with the full weight of waiting again. And you're not sure you're ready to carry that. So you stay. Not because you're certain, but because you're close enough to imagine an ending. Almost keeps the door open, just wide enough to keep you standing there. But illusions don't last forever. They fade. Not with impact, but with quiet. One day you realize nothing actually moved. Only your hope did. This realization doesn't break you. It slows you. You feel the weight return. Heavier now. Because you lifted it once already. Almost didn't save you. It delayed you. And yet, you don't regret believing. Because believing felt like living. Even if it was temporary. But now, something else begins. Not hope. Not despair. Awareness. At first, waiting was something you did. Something temporary. Something you could explain. But slowly, without asking you, it became something else. It became who you are. You don't notice the shift when it happens. There's no announcement. No clear moment where you can point and say, that's when it changed. It happens the way habits form. Quietly, through repetition. You start introducing yourself differently. Not with words, but with expectations. You don't plan too far ahead. You don't commit fully. You keep space open, just in case. Waiting becomes your default setting. People ask what you're doing with your life. You give vague answers. Not because you don't know, but because knowing feels dishonest. Everything feels provisional now. Nothing feels finished. You begin to define yourself by what hasn't happened yet. The thing you're waiting for sits quietly in the background of every decision. It shapes how much effort you give, how much risk you take, how much you allow yourself to want. Waiting becomes a filter. You don't choose based on desire anymore. You choose based on compatibility with the wait. Will this interfere? Will this distract? Will this make leaving harder? There's a strange comfort in this. Waiting gives you an explanation. It tells you why things are unfinished, why you haven't moved yet, why life feels paused. It becomes a story you tell yourself, so you don't have to face uncertainty. But stories have power. The longer you tell one, the more real it becomes. Soon you don't just say, you're waiting. You act like someone who is waiting. Carefully, cautiously, quietly. You stop rushing. Not because you're calm, but because urgency doesn't fit your role anymore. You've adapted. Waiting teaches you patience, yes, but it also teaches you restraint. Sometimes too much. There's a loss here. That's easy to miss. It's not dramatic. It doesn't hurt sharply. It's the loss of spontaneity. the loss of impulsive joy, the loss of becoming someone new. Without permission, you start to believe this is just who you are now. The person who waits, the person who holds back, the person who prepares instead of acts. And that belief settles deep. But identity built on waiting is fragile, because if the wait ends, you don't know who you are without it. And if it doesn't, you don't know how long you can keep being this person. This is the quiet tension, not between you and time, but between you and yourself. You're not stuck. You're stable. And stability can look like safety, while slowly becoming a cage. Soon, you'll face a question you've been avoiding, not about when the wait ends, but about whether you still want to be defined by it. There is a room you enter without noticing. It doesn't look special. It doesn't feel dangerous. It's just quiet. This is the room where nothing happens. You didn't choose this room. You arrived here by staying still long enough, by waiting without protest, by accepting pauses as normal, by telling yourself this moment would pass. But moments like this don't pass. They settle. In this room, there are no signs, no deadlines, no warnings, no countdown. Time doesn't push you forward here. It simply watches. You sit longer than you planned to. Not because you're tired, but because standing up feels unnecessary. There's nothing pulling you forward, nothing pushing you back. Just space. This is where most people leave. Not physically, but mentally. They numb themselves here. Distractions become routine. Noise becomes comfort. Anything to avoid feeling how still everything is. But you're still aware. You notice how quiet can feel heavy, how stillness can feel loud, how doing nothing can feel like effort. The room doesn't punish you. It tests you. In this room, you stop pretending progress is happening. There are no illusions here. No. Almost. No signs of movement. Just honesty. You start confronting thoughts you postponed for a long time. Questions you avoided because they didn't have answers. What am I actually waiting for? Who would I be if this ended tomorrow? What if nothing changes? The room doesn't answer. It lets the questions echo. This is the moment where waiting feels neutral, not hopeful, not painful, just present. And that neutrality is unsettling because it removes excuses. There's no comfort in this room, but there is clarity. You see yourself without motion, without momentum, without stories to soften the truth. And you don't look broken. You look paused. Pauses are dangerous, not because they hurt, but because they reveal. They show you what remains. When nothing is happening, you realize something quietly. Waiting didn't trap you. Avoidance did. The room was never locked. You just never stood up. This realization doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand action. It simply places the truth in front of you and waits. The room where nothing happens is not the end. It's the mirror. And once you see yourself clearly, the wait begins to change shape. There's a phrase people repeat when they don't know what else to say. Be patient. They say it gently, as advice, as encouragement. But patience is not what they think it is. They talk about patience like it's passive, like it's sitting still, like it's enduring quietly, like it's doing nothing until something happens. That's the lie. Real patience is not empty. It's active. It requires awareness, honesty, attention, and most importantly, choice. Waiting without awareness is not patience. It's avoidance. It's the slow surrender to inertia. And no one warns you about that. People praise patience because it sounds virtuous, but they rarely talk about what patience costs. It costs comfort. It costs certainty. It costs the illusion that doing nothing is neutral. You've been patient for a long time. Not weakly, not lazily, but quietly. You stayed when leaving felt risky. You waited when acting felt premature. You trusted when doubt would have been easier. That wasn't nothing. But patience without direction starts to blur into delay. And delay slowly teaches you to shrink your expectations. Not consciously, not intentionally, just subtly. You stop asking for much. You stop imagining big shifts. You stop expecting clarity. Not because you don't want more, but because wanting starts to feel unsafe. This is where the lie does its damage. Because patience is supposed to protect hope. Instead, it starts eroding it. No one tells you that patience needs boundaries, that it needs intention, that it needs moments where you check in and ask, am I still choosing this? Or have I just stayed too long? You've been told that patience will be rewarded, but reward implies action. It implies participation, not disappearance. The truth is, patience is not about waiting longer. It's about staying awake. While you wait, awake enough to notice when waiting stops serving you. Awake enough to recognize when stillness turns into hiding. Awake enough to admit that endurance alone is not growth. This doesn't mean you failed. It means you've learned something. Something quiet. Something honest. Something most people never stop long enough to understand. Patience is not infinite. It's deliberate. And the moment you realize that, waiting begins to loosen its grip. You don't need to rush. You don't need to rebel. You just need to stop confusing endurance with intention. Because patience was never meant to erase you. It was meant to prepare you. There comes a moment that feels smaller than it should. No announcement. No relief. No dramatic shift. Just a quiet thought. I'm tired of expecting. This isn't giving up. It doesn't feel like defeat. It feels like setting something down that you've been carrying longer than you realized. Expectation is heavy, and you didn't notice the weight until you released it. When you stop expecting, the world doesn't change, but you do. Your breathing deepens. Your thoughts slow. Your attention returns to where you actually are, not where you hope to be. This moment is misunderstood. People think expectation is the same as hope. It isn't. Expectation demands outcomes. Hope simply allows possibility. Letting go of expectation doesn't close the door. It stops guarding it. You stop scanning the horizon. You stop interpreting silence. You stop assigning meaning to every delay. And in that absence, space appears. This space feels unfamiliar, almost empty. For a while, you don't know what to do with it. You were so focused on what might happen that you forgot how to be present when nothing does. Without expectation, time feels different. It no longer drags you forward or holds you back. It simply moves, and you move with it. You begin doing things without asking if they matter later. You choose based on interest, not consequence. You act without checking whether this interferes with the weight. This is freedom, but a quiet one. Not excitement, not certainty, just permission. Permission to exist without rehearsal. You notice something surprising. Nothing collapses when you stop expecting. The world doesn't punish you. The future doesn't disappear. The weight loses its authority. You haven't moved on, but you're no longer paused. You're present, and presence is powerful. This is where the weight starts ending. Not because something arrives, but because you no longer require it to. Expectation once defined your days. Now curiosity does. You don't know what comes next. And for the first time, that feels honest. You're not early. You're not late. You're here. And here is enough to stand on. The weight doesn't disappear, but it becomes background noise. No longer the center. No longer the story. The end of waiting does not arrive loudly. There is no moment where everything clicks into place. No announcement. No confirmation. It ends the same way it lived. Quietly. You don't wake up one day feeling different. You wake up feeling lighter. Not because something happened, but because something stopped happening. The tension fades first. Then the urgency. Then the constant checking. You realize you are no longer measuring time by absence. You are no longer asking, "How long has it been?" You're asking, "What am I doing right now?" And that shift matters. The thing you were waiting for may still exist. It may still come, but it no longer owns you. It doesn't dictate your pace. It doesn't define your worth. It doesn't sit in every decision. It becomes optional. This is what freedom actually feels like. Not excitement, not triumph, just steadiness. You move without negotiating with the future. You choose without bracing for disappointment. You notice life again. Small details return. The way light shifts during the day. The sound of ordinary moments. The feeling of doing something without asking if it leads somewhere. Presence replaces anticipation. Nothing dramatic has changed, but everything feels different. Because you are no longer standing still, waiting for permission to move. You already moved. The wait didn't end because something arrived. It ended because you did. You arrived in your own life. You understand now that waiting was never wasted. It taught you stillness. It taught you honesty. It taught you what it feels like to face time without distraction. But lessons don't last forever. They prepare you, then let you go. You don't need to erase the weight. It's part of you, but it's no longer the frame around everything. It becomes a chapter, not the whole story. Some people never leave the weight. They confuse endurance with meaning. But you did something different. You stayed long enough to learn. Then you stood up. And when the wait ends like this, quietly, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like continuation. There is no rush now. No pressure to arrive. Just motion. Just choice. Just time. Moving with you again. You are no longer waiting. You are living.